What is going on, everybody? Thank you guys so much for joining me today. And I'm going to be continuing my season predictions for this upcoming NHL 2021-2022 season. For this video, I'll be covering a team who has a ton of pressure and a ton of expectations to win a Stanley Cup within the next few years, being the Colorado Avalanche. So entering last year, it was pretty clear that Colorado had established themselves as a legitimate Stanley Cup contender. With a relatively young but yet already elite core, they're looking to be a legitimate threat to win a Stanley Cup over the next decade. Taking a look at their stats from last season, they had a dominant regular season, finishing with a 39-13-4 record for a total of 82 points, which got them first in the West Division and the President's Trophy. Seeing as they were the best team in the NHL, they were entering the playoffs with all the pressure in the world to win a Stanley Cup championship. But unfortunately, come playoff time, they did lose in the second round, albeit to a formidable opponent in the Vegas Golden Knights, but there's no question that this team underachieved. So taking a look at their offensive numbers from last year, they averaged a 3.52 goals for per game, which ranked as the best in the NHL, and a 22.7% power play percentage, solid in the NHL. A very elite offense. And looking at their defensive stats, also amazing. 2.36 goals against per game, which ranked third in the league, and an 83% penalty percentage, which was also 8th. Very solid defense as well. Taking a look at their top 5 scorers from last year, their leading scorer was Mikko Rantanen, who scored 30 goals and 36 assists for 66 points in 52 games. Obviously, we all know that Rantanen has proven that he's an elite winger in this league, and he quietly had a pretty amazing year being top 5 in NHL scoring. Right behind him, of course, Nathan MacKinnon in 48 games had 20 goals and 45 assists for 65 points. We all know Nathan MacKinnon is one of the best players in the league, and had he played a full season, he probably would have been first in scoring. In third, we have the final part of that trio top line with Gabriel Lannister scoring 20 goals and 2 assists for 52 points in 54 games. Although Landeskog isn't the elite offensive player that Rantanen and MacKinnon are, but we all know that he's capable of providing a ton of offense on that top line, and he's a very underrated asset. Then we have a two-way tie for 4th place, first being Burakovsky with a solid 19 goals and 25 assists for 44 points in 53 games. Burakovsky was a very young winger with a ton of potential in Washington, but ever since he arrived in Colorado, he's low-key broken out, and he's a very solid second-line option. Then also in 4th, we have Kayla Mccarr, who in 44 games was a point per game for a defenseman with 8 goals and 36 assists for 44 points. Obviously, he's the next Erik Karlsson for a reason, a dynamic offensive defenseman, and people already claim he's the best in the league. That's how good he is right now at such a young age. Then, of course, Philip Grubauer, who had a Vezina caliber year in 40 games with a 39-1 record, a 1.95 goals against average, and a .922 save percentage. Going into last year, I think the one question mark that people had about this team was if their goaltending would hold up, but Philip Grubauer really solidified their goaltending and took his game to another level. So obviously, we know the jig with this team. They're still an elite team, one of the best offenses in the league, one of the best defenses in the league. They are going to be a problem. Now, entering this year, although I do think they're legitimately still a Stanley Cup contender, they did take a little bit of a step back on paper at least. If you look at what happened in the offseason, one of the biggest key losses they had was the loss of Ryan Graves on the blue line. Ryan Graves was a very solid young defensive defenseman for this team, and obviously they didn't want to lose him in the expansion draft to Seattle, so they had to flip him in New Jersey, or they would have lose him for nothing. But regardless, that's definitely a key loss on their defense. And then, of course, they lost a couple of depth forwards in Jonas Donskoy, who was the guy claimed by Seattle, a very solid bottom 6 scorer for this team. And they also lost Brandon Saad, who fit pretty well in a goal-scoring role on the second line. He signed with St. Louis. The biggest loss they suffered was Philip Grubauer, who decided to sign with the Seattle Kraken. He wasn't claimed or anything, but he decided as a free agent to part ways from an amazing situation in Colorado. Obviously, based on the Vezina caliber year he had, this is going to be a tough guy to replace, but they did manage to replace him with Darcy Kemper. Now, Darcy Kemper was honestly pretty solid throughout his time with the Arizona Coyotes, but now being in a situation with the Colorado Avalanche, there's going to be a ton of pressure on him to fill the void that Grubauer left. But considering the Avalanche are still a pretty good defensive team, and Kemper still being a good goalie, I think he should be just fine. And they also added some depth on defense with Ryan Murray. Ryan Murray hasn't quite lived up to the hype as being the number 2 overall pick in the 2012 draft. When healthy, I still think he's pretty decent, and he can contribute a little bit of points here and there. So obviously, I can't say that this team is better than they were last season, but at the same time, I still think their team is elite enough all around with their core that they should be a legitimate Stanley Cup contender, and probably one of the favorites, if not the favorite, to come out of the Western Conference this year. Taking a look at who I think will be their top 5 scorers this upcoming year, first being Nathan MacKinnon. Obviously, like I said, he's a top 3 player in this league. He can easily score 100 points if he's healthy. He's an absolute monster, and he actually shows up in the playoffs. So I have him scoring 40 goals and 72 assists for 112 points. There's just very few players in the league like him, and if healthy, he should easily be top 5 in NHL scoring, most likely top 3. And in second, I have McKinnon's partner in crime in Mikko Rantanen, scoring 45 goals, which would lead the team, and adding 53 assists for 98 points. We all know that Rantanen's very skilled and a dynamic offensive player, but I still feel like he doesn't get the credit he deserves. Now, since he will be playing on McKinnon's wing, he could potentially hit more than 100 points. Now, I have him just shy of that just because I'm not sure if he can do it, but also it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. And he's just one of the least talked about elite players in this league. And he's just incredibly underrated in my opinion. And third, I got Kayla Mccarr scoring 17 goals and 63 assists for 80 points, nearly a point per game for the defenseman. At such a young age, only going to his 3rd NHL season, he's already proven to be a point per game defenseman, which is as rare as they come. I think there's no doubt in my mind that he probably will lead all D-men in scoring if he's fully healthy. And could he potentially hit more than 80 points? I think that's definitely a possibility. If he can hit 85, maybe 90, he's that dynamic offensively. He'll put up a ton of points playing on an elite team like the Colorado Avalanche. And in fourth, I got Gabriel Lannister scoring a very solid 29 goals and 47 assists for 76 points. Again, he's a very complete winger, very underrated. He completes that top line with McKinnon and Rantanen. He's very responsible defensively and should be a lock for at least 65 points and likely 70 plus, playing with 2 dynamic elite offensive players in Nathan McKinnon and Mikko Rantanen. Then in fifth, I have Burakovsky scoring 24 goals and 41 assists for 65 points. He's just a perfect fit on that second line, but with all the depth they lost, he's going to be heavily relied upon to lead the secondary scoring. Ever since he's arrived at the Mile High City, he has been producing at roughly a 60-point pace, so I think 60-65 points seems fair to me. Getting to where I think they finish in the standings in the Central Division, I mean, it's pretty obvious they're going to do pretty well here. Although the Central Division is much tougher than the West Division that they were a part of last season, I still think that they should win the division pretty comfortably. So I have them first in the Central Division with a 54-23-5 record for a total of 113 points. And of course, they are a lock to make the playoffs, no doubt in my mind. Obviously, offensively, they're elite. Defensively, they're elite, like I said previously. Again, for goaltending, we'll have to see how Darcy Kemper plays in his first season in the Avs uniform. But I think he played very solid for the Coyotes, so honestly, he should be just fine here. If he can have a Vezina caliber season like Grubauer did last year, once again, this Avs team is going to be a huge favorite to come out of the West, and potentially a favorite to win the Stanley Cup. There's just a huge amount of pressure on this team, and anything less than a Stanley Cup championship this upcoming season would be considered a failure. So that's going to do it for my season predictions and my season preview on the Colorado Avalanche. It'd be great to hear all your thoughts on where you think this Avs team stands this season. I don't feel like anybody thinks that this team's not a playoff team, so my questions would be, where do you guys see them in the postseason? Do you think they can finally get over the hump and win their Stanley Cup? Or do you still think they're a couple years away and they fall short of the playoffs and they still need to continue to kind of grind and get a little bit better in the postseason, and eventually they'll get it in a couple years to come? That's going to do it for me. Click like if you like this video, and please consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. See you guys later.